Have you ever imagined receiving a call that wouldn't just change your life, but also shape the destiny of all humanity? Nearly 4,000 years ago, an ordinary man experienced exactly that. His name was Abram, later known as Abraham, and his remarkable journey continues to influence more than half of the world's population to this day. Three of the world's major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, revere him as their spiritual patriarch. Countless people trace their faith and heritage back to this man who, at the age of 75, made a decision that forever altered the course of history. This is the story of how a childless elder became the father of nations, how an unassuming man emerged as one of history's greatest symbols of faith, and how a single journey transformed into one of the most legendary adventures ever recorded in the pages of the Bible. Prepare to delve into the astonishing story of Abraham, the father of nations. Our narrative begins in one of the most significant cities of the ancient world, Ur of the Chaldeans. Situated in southern Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, Ur was a flourishing city around 2000 BCE. With an estimated population of 250,000, it was a thriving metropolis, fortified by towering walls that safeguarded its palaces, temples, and homes built from mud bricks. As described in Genesis 11:27, this is the account of Terah's family line. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. Abram's family lived in an advanced society for its time. The Sumerians, the inhabitants of Ur, had already developed cuneiform writing, excelled in mathematics and astronomy, and established complex systems of law and commerce. At the city's core stood an imposing ziggurat, a massive pyramid-like temple devoted to the moon god Nanna. Joshua 24:2 states, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods." This means Abram's family resided in a deeply polytheistic culture where multiple deities were worshipped, with the moon god being one of the most revered. Genesis 11:28-29 recounts a tragic moment for the family. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Following Haran's untimely death, his son Lot was taken in by his uncle Abram, an event that would have significant consequences later on. Ur was a bustling trade hub, strategically located along the Euphrates River. Merchants traveled across the region, exchanging goods like wool, dates, grains, and precious metals. It is likely that Terah's family was involved in this prosperous trade, as they later amassed considerable wealth in livestock and servants. Then, something extraordinary occurred. Genesis 11:31 reveals, Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The text does not specify why Terah decided to leave Ur, but this choice marked the start of a monumental journey. The family caravan traveled roughly 1,000 kilometers north, following the Euphrates River until they reached Haran, located in modern-day southeastern Turkey. This route was well-trodden by traders, but remained perilous, fraught with bandit attacks and the harsh desert climate. The family temporarily settled in Haran, where Terah eventually passed away. As noted in Genesis 11:32, Terah lived 205 years and he died in Haran. It was in Haran that the most pivotal moment of the story unfolded. In Genesis 12:1-3, God's extraordinary call is recorded. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." This divine command was unparalleled for its time. In an era where every region had its own gods, one supreme God was now making astonishing promises to a single individual. The call was radical: abandon everything, homeland, kin, security, to embark on an uncertain path. Hebrews 11:8 highlights Abram's faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. The promises were vast. Abram would become the ancestor of a great nation, his name would be renowned, and through him all the families of the earth would be blessed. At this point, however, Abram was already 75 years old, and his wife Sarai was barren, as Genesis 11:30 states. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. By human reasoning, the prospect of a great nation arising from Abram seemed impossible, yet his response to God's call was immediate. Genesis 12:4 records, "So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him." The caravan that departed from Haran was substantial. Verse 5 provides additional details. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. This was no small undertaking. Transporting tents, tools, and provisions while tending to large herds of sheep and cattle was an immense logistical challenge. The road ahead would be long and filled with trials. They had to journey through unfamiliar lands, negotiate safe passage with local tribes, find sustenance for their animals, and trust entirely in divine guidance. Abram's calling marked a turning point in the history of salvation. It was the inception of God's plan to redeem humanity through a chosen people, as later emphasized in Galatians 3:8. Scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announce the gospel in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. Abraham's unwavering obedience set a precedent that would be mirrored throughout biblical history. Moses called to lead Israel to freedom, Samuel anointed as a prophet, David chosen as king, and the disciples summoned to follow Jesus. In each instance, God selected ordinary individuals for extraordinary purposes, requiring them to walk in faith and obedience. Thus, holding fast to God's promise, Abraham embarked on his journey to Canaan. Little did he know that this was merely the beginning, with even greater trials awaiting him. Yet his steadfast commitment to the divine call would ultimately shape him into the father of many nations and a timeless symbol of faith. After a long and arduous journey from Haran, Abraham finally arrived in Canaan. As recorded in Genesis 12:6, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites inhabited the region, a land of abundance stretching from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. The Egyptians referred to it as a land flowing with milk and honey due to its fertility. The terrain was diverse, featuring fertile plains along the coast, mountainous regions in the center, and the Jordan Valley to the east. The climate varied, mild by the sea, arid inland, with two primary seasons, rainy and dry. Strategically positioned, Canaan served as a crossroads between the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. Rather than a unified kingdom, it was a collection of independent city-states, each ruled by its own king. The Canaanites were renowned for their advanced agricultural practices and thriving trade, but their religious customs were steeped in idolatry, including human sacrifices and immoral rituals. As Genesis 12:7 states, The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared to him. This was a defining moment, the first altar Abraham built in the Promised Land, signifying the beginning of true worship in a land dominated by idols. However, a great trial soon followed. Genesis 12:10 recounts, "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe." In ancient times, famine posed a grave threat, capable of devastating entire regions. Without modern irrigation or food storage systems, survival depended entirely on seasonal rains. Seeking refuge in Egypt was a logical choice. The Nile Valley, with its abundant water supply, was rarely afflicted by drought. Yet as they approached Egypt, Abraham faced a difficult dilemma. In Genesis 12:11-13, he tells Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." His fears were justified. Egyptian pharaohs wielded absolute power and could take whatever they desired. But his decision to be deceitful or to tell a half-truth, since Sarai was indeed his half-sister, revealed a momentary lapse in faith in God's protection. As anticipated, Sarai was taken into Pharaoh's palace. Genesis 12:15-16 states, "When Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels." But God intervened to safeguard Sarai. Genesis 12:17-20 recounts how the Lord afflicted Pharaoh's household with severe plagues because of her. Upon discovering the truth, Pharaoh returned Sarai to Abraham and expelled them from Egypt, allowing them to keep the wealth they had gained. Upon returning to Canaan, a new challenge arose between Abraham and Lot. Genesis 13:5-7 states, "Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together, and quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's herders. Abraham, exercising wisdom and generosity, proposed a solution. In Genesis 13:8-9, he told Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part ways. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot chose what seemed the most prosperous land, the lush, well-irrigated plains of the Jordan, reminiscent of the Garden of the Lord. Genesis 13:12 states, "Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom." This decision would later lead to grave consequences. After their separation, God reaffirmed his promise to Abraham. Genesis 13:14-17 states, "The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, 'Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted.'" Not long afterward, a major conflict erupted. Genesis 14 describes a war between two factions, 4 eastern kings against 5 kings from the Dead Sea region, including those of Sodom and Gomorrah. The eastern kings emerged victorious, seizing captives from the defeated cities, including Lot. Upon learning of his nephew's capture, Abraham sprang into action. Genesis 14:14-15 states, "When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack them and routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. Abraham's triumph was decisive. He rescued Lot, reclaimed all possessions, and liberated the captives. On his return from battle, he encountered a remarkable figure. Genesis 14:18-20 recounts, "Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, 'Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand.'" Melchizedek, both a king and a priest of God Most High, is later seen as a foreshadowing of Christ in the book of Hebrews. Recognizing his spiritual authority, Abraham honored him by offering a tenth of his possessions. Soon after, the king of Sodom offered Abraham the recovered goods, but he refused, declaring in Genesis 14:22-23, "With raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I made Abram rich.'" Following these events, God appeared to Abraham in a profound vision. Genesis 15:1 states, "After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. 'Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward.'" It was at this moment that God formalized his covenant with Abraham. As instructed, Abraham prepared a solemn ritual, cutting various animals in half and arranging them opposite each other. Genesis 15:12, 13, and 17 records, "As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, 'Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there.' When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. This sacred ritual sealed the covenant. Only God, symbolized by fire and smoke, passed between the pieces, affirming that the fulfillment of his promises rested entirely upon his divine authority. Abraham hurried to his herd, selected a tender and choice calf, and handed it over to a servant, who swiftly prepared it. Along with curds and milk, he served the meal to his guests. As they ate, one of the visitors, who was none other than the Lord himself, delivered an astonishing message: Sarah would bear a son. In Genesis 18:10, the Lord declared, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Overhearing this from the entrance of the tent, Sarah laughed quietly to herself, just as Abraham had done before. Following this remarkable promise, the Lord disclosed his plans regarding Sodom and Gomorrah, as stated in Genesis 18:20. "Then the Lord said, 'The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is immense, and their sin is exceedingly grievous.'" This led Abraham into an extraordinary act of intercession. In a bold and heartfelt exchange, he pleaded with God, asking if the cities could be spared for the sake of 50 righteous people, then 45, 40, 30, 20, and finally 10. Each time, the Lord assured him that if that number of righteous individuals could be found, he would withhold his judgment. The following evening, 2 angels arrived in Sodom. Genesis 19:1 describes the scene. The 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the city gate. Like his uncle Abraham, Lot demonstrated great hospitality, insisting that the visitors stay at his home. However, the true depravity of the city soon became apparent. A mob of men surrounded Lot's house, demanding that he bring out his guests so they could assault them. Genesis 19:4-5 recounts the horrifying moment. "Before they lay down to sleep, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, gathered around the house from every part of town. They shouted to Lot, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them.' The angels then revealed their true mission. In Genesis 19:13 they declared, "For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to wipe it out." Urgently, they instructed Lot to gather his family and flee. Yet even with destruction looming, Lot hesitated. At dawn, the angels physically took hold of him, his wife, and his 2 daughters, leading them safely out of the doomed city. Once outside, they gave a strict command. Genesis 19:17 records their words, "Flee for your lives. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away." Then came the devastating judgment. In Genesis 19:24-25 it says, "Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all who lived there and everything that grew on the land." But in a tragic moment of disobedience, Lot's wife turned back, defying the angel's warning, and was instantly transformed into a pillar of salt. The destruction was absolute. Genesis 19:28 describes Abraham witnessing the aftermath. Early the next morning, Abraham went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. This event remained a sobering reminder of divine judgment. Yet amid the unfolding tragedy, God's promise to Abraham and Sarah was about to be fulfilled. Time passed just as the Lord had foretold. Genesis 21:1-2 states, "The Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. She conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had predicted." At 90 years old, Sarah's pregnancy was nothing short of a miracle. Centuries later, the Apostle Paul would reflect on this in Romans 4:19-20. Without weakening in faith, he faced the fact that his body was as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, and that Sarah's womb was also barren. Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God. News of Sarah's miraculous pregnancy must have spread far and wide. In Genesis 18:14, the Lord had asked, "Is anything too difficult for the Lord?" Now the answer was evident for all to see. Sarah's transformation was a living testimony of God's power. She herself had once doubted, saying in Genesis 18:12, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Yet God had renewed her strength, making the impossible a reality. Abraham, now 100 years old, awaited the birth with a mix of anticipation and awe. Once he had laughed in disbelief when he first heard the news, but now the fulfillment of God's promise was unfolding before his eyes. Then the long-awaited day finally arrived. Genesis 21:3 recounts, "Abraham named his son, the one Sarah bore to him, Isaac." The name Isaac means laughter, a permanent reminder of both his parents' initial doubts and their overwhelming joy. Sarah, overjoyed, proclaimed in Genesis 21:6-7, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. Who would have thought that I would nurse children? Yet I have given Abraham a son in his old age." Her happiness was contagious, spreading to everyone around her. Isaac's birth was a monumental event, leaving a deep impression on the entire community. Abraham's servants, who had witnessed his unwavering faith, now saw the fulfillment of God's promise. The neighbors, who had known Sarah's struggles, beheld a miracle with their own eyes. As she joyfully declared, "God has brought me laughter, and all who hear will rejoice with me." Isaac was raised with immense care. Sarah, after years of longing for a child, devoted herself wholeheartedly to him. Abraham, steadfast in his faith, surely shared with his son the stories of God's guidance and promises. Genesis 21:8 states, "The child grew and was weaned." In their culture, this milestone usually occurred when a child was 2 or 3 years old, often marked by a grand celebration. As recorded, Abraham held a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. However, during this joyful event, tensions arose. Genesis 21:9 reveals, "But Sarah noticed that the son Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abraham, was mocking." The Hebrew word used here can mean either playing or mocking, but Sarah's reaction suggests that Ishmael was ridiculing Isaac. Deeply troubled by this, Sarah turned to Abraham, demanding, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for he will never share in the inheritance with my son, Isaac." This greatly distressed Abraham, as Ishmael was also his son. But God intervened, as recorded in Genesis 21:11-12. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said, "Do not be troubled about the boy and your servant. Listen to Sarah, for it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Yet God also assured Abraham that Ishmael would not be abandoned. Genesis 21:13 affirms, "I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." With this divine reassurance, Abraham rose early the next morning and sent Hagar and Ishmael away, providing them with bread and a skin of water. Their journey through the wilderness was harsh. When their water ran out, Hagar, overcome with despair, placed Ishmael under a bush and walked away, unable to watch him die. But God heard the boy's cries. In Genesis 21:17-19, the angel of God called to Hagar and said, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying. Lift him up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, ensuring their survival. Meanwhile, Abraham continued to settle in the land of Gerar, where he would face a pivotal negotiation over a vital resource: water. Upon reaching the designated place, as instructed by God, Abraham constructed an altar and arranged the wood upon it. He then bound his son Isaac and placed him atop the altar. Remarkably, the text offers no mention of resistance from Isaac, who was strong enough to carry the wood for the offering and could have resisted if he chose to. His silent compliance serves as a profound foreshadowing of the willing sacrifice of Jesus Christ centuries later. Just as Abraham was about to lower the knife upon his son, divine intervention took place. At that critical moment, a voice from heaven called out to Abraham, "Abraham, Abraham!" He responded, "Here I am." The voice continued, "Do not harm the boy, do not lay a hand on him. Now I know that you fear God, for you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Immediately, God provided a substitute. Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a nearby thicket. He took the ram and offered it as a burnt sacrifice in place of his son. This act signified the principle of substitution, an innocent life given in place of another. The location was given a meaningful name. Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide," and from that moment it was said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." This site, Mount Moriah, would later become the location where Solomon erected the temple in Jerusalem. Centuries after that, near this very spot, Jesus Christ would be crucified. The theological depth of this event is immense. It represented the ultimate test of Abraham's faith. Would he trust God even when the command seemed to contradict the very promise he had been given? The book of James later reflects on this moment. Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? His faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. The parallel between Abraham's act and the sacrifice of Christ is striking. Just as Abraham was willing to surrender his only son, God the Father would ultimately offer his only son to redeem humanity. Jesus himself referenced Abraham's faith, saying, "Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad." Following this trial, God reaffirmed and expanded his promises to Abraham. The Lord declared, Because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I swear by myself that I will bless you abundantly. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the shore. Your offspring will possess the cities of their enemies, and through them all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." The journey home must have felt entirely different from the one they had taken to the mountain. Father and son had shared a profound, transformative experience. Abraham's faith had been tested and strengthened, and Isaac had witnessed firsthand God's faithfulness and provision. The impact of this event on their community must have been immense. Word spread quickly about how Abraham had been willing to sacrifice his beloved son in obedience to God, and how, at the last moment, God intervened. This story became a powerful testament for generations to come, illustrating the significance of faith and obedience. After enduring such a test, Abraham's life was marked by even deeper peace and trust. He had learned in the most dramatic way that he could trust God entirely. As Paul later wrote, he did not waver in unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith, giving glory to God, fully convinced that God had the power to do what he had promised. Abraham's character had reached its pinnacle through this experience. Once a man who had struggled with fear and deception, he had now become someone who could trust God completely, even in the face of loss. His influence on those around him only grew, as he could now speak with unwavering authority about faith in the most difficult moments. Life in Beersheba continued, but nothing would ever be the same. Both Abraham and Isaac had encountered something that permanently reshaped their understanding of God's faithfulness. The later years of Abraham's life were marked by significant events, beginning with the passing of his beloved wife, Sarah. Sarah lived to the age of 127 and died in Kiriath Arba, Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Abraham mourned her deeply and sought to secure a proper burial place. He approached the Hittites, stating, "I am a foreigner among you. Sell me a property for a burial site so I may lay my wife to rest." The negotiation over the cave of Machpelah is detailed in Scripture, emphasizing the respect Abraham had earned among the people of the land. When addressing the Hittites, Abraham specifically requested the cave of Machpelah from Ephron, son of Zohar, offering to purchase it for its full value. Though Ephron initially offered it as a gift, Abraham insisted on paying the rightful price. He weighed out 400 shekels of silver, finalizing the transaction. This purchase ensured a lasting burial site for his family, a place of great significance even today. After Sarah's passing, Abraham turned his attention to securing a wife for Isaac. Now, an old man blessed in every way by God, he entrusted his senior servant with the task of finding a bride from among his relatives in Mesopotamia. This led to Isaac's marriage to Rebekah. Later, Abraham himself remarried, taking Keturah as his wife, with whom he had several sons. These children would go on to become the ancestors of various tribes and nations. However, Abraham made a clear distinction between Isaac and his other sons. Abraham ensured that Isaac would inherit all he owned, while giving gifts to his other sons and sending them eastward. Eventually, Abraham's own time came to an end. He lived for 175 years, passing away at an advanced age, having lived a full and meaningful life. His funeral became a moment of reconciliation, as his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, came together to bury him in the cave of Machpelah. This burial site, where Sarah had been laid to rest, would later become the resting place for Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, remaining a sacred location to this day. Abraham's influence shaped the foundations of faith for generations to come. In Judaism, he is revered as Avinu, our Father, the ultimate example of faith and obedience. When revealing himself to Moses, God declared, "I am the God of Abraham," reaffirming this connection. In Christianity, Abraham is seen as the model of faith and righteousness. As Paul wrote, "Understand then that those who have faith are children of Abraham." His willingness to offer Isaac is considered a foreshadowing of Christ's sacrifice, serving as a powerful illustration of faith in Romans chapter 4. In Islam, Ibrahim, is one of the greatest prophets and is honored as the builder of the Kaaba in Mecca alongside his son Ishmael. The festival of Eid al-Adha commemorates Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son, identified as Ishmael in Islamic tradition. The sacred sites associated with Abraham are revered by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam alike, reinforcing his enduring spiritual legacy.